My husband divorced me by text. I'm leaving you and moving to Miami with my 20-year-old babe. I've already emptied our joint account, haha. I calmly replied, good luck. When he realized what I'd done, it was already too late. When the text message arrived, I was in the middle of assisting a customer with a pair of trousers in my boutique. My phone buzzed, and I only glanced at it for a moment, thinking it might be a routine alert. Instead, it was a bombshell. I'm done. I'm moving to Miami with my 20-year-old girlfriend. Already drained our joint account. Enjoy picking up the pieces. I felt a brief tingle in my fingertips, but my voice remained perfectly steady. That looks fantastic on you, I told Mrs. Perkins with a professional smile, gesturing to the mirror so she could see the pants from every angle. Not even my hands shook as I finished ringing her up. The only sign that something catastrophic had just happened was a tightness around my eyes I couldn't quite hide. My husband of 12 years, Stephen, had chosen to destroy our marriage with a single casual text, and he clearly believed I would crumble at his feet once I realized what he'd done. After all, he'd emptied our joint account and announced his departure like it was his triumphant finale. I tucked the receipt into Mrs. Perkins's bag, thanked her for her purchase, and wished her a wonderful day. Only after she walked out the door, the boutique's bell chiming softly, did I type a brief, controlled reply. Good luck. My name is Ava, and I'm 38. Less than an hour ago, I received the most callous parting message in human history. While Stephen was probably gloating somewhere, imagining me sobbing on the floor over his betrayal, I methodically locked up my boutique for the afternoon, my mind already planning the steps I'd put in motion long before he sent that text. You see, the warning signs had been there for months. His phone's passwords had changed overnight. He started dressing differently. Tighter shirts, designer shoes he'd never shown interest in before. He spent more time at the gym than at home. And every time he said he was working late, the deposits in his bank statements never seemed to match the hours he claimed. His sudden interest in finances also alerted me. He'd suggested merging all our accounts to streamline our money. On the surface, it might have sounded practical, but something in my gut told me to be cautious. 3 months ago, I found a receipt for a romantic dinner for 2 on a night Stephen had insisted he was stuck at the office. That was the final spark I needed. After uncovering that receipt, I went straight to another bank and opened a separate account that only I had access to. I started funneling my personal savings into it the minute he wasn't looking. The joint account we'd shared, I left a realistic amount in there, enough to ensure Stephen wouldn't get suspicious. But the bulk of our funds, or at least my portion, was safely moved. Every deposit meticulously documented. A week after I opened the account, Stephen once again brought up the idea of combining all our money to make life easier. I gave him my warmest, most enthusiastic smile, feigning support. He had no clue that I'd already done exactly what he was planning for himself, just more cleverly. And now, after months of me quietly organizing my affairs, he sent me that lazy text while he gallivanted off to Miami with his brand new girlfriend, Jenna, the naive receptionist I met at Stephen's office party. I recall how she'd giggled too loudly at his stale jokes, how she casually brushed her hand against his sleeve. Still, I'd never have guessed he was reckless enough to blow up our entire marriage this way. Well, not until I found those shady receipts. My phone buzzed with another incoming message. Don't even think about pleading. Jenna and I leave tomorrow morning. I'll swing by for my stuff later. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Right, like I was going to chase him down and beg him not to destroy our marriage. He was acting so sure I'd be devastated enough to do exactly that. Instead, I called my lawyer, Danielle, whom I'd quietly consulted a couple of months back, when the suspicious hotel charges started showing up on our credit card statement. Hey Danielle, I said, my tone as calm as ever. Stephen finally did it. He emptied our account and booked a trip to Miami. Time to proceed, he made. His move, huh? Danielle replied without a trace of surprise. Do you want me to file the paperwork first thing in the morning? Yes, I answered. He's already bragged about taking the money. Let's go all in. You got it, she said. And if you want him served in Miami, we can arrange that too. I paused, picturing Stephen sitting smugly on some flight, with Jenna by his side. No rush, I finally said. Let him think he's free and clear. I want him nice and comfortable before the shock hits. Only a few seconds passed before Stephen sent yet another text. You must be pretty upset. You're not getting younger, Ava. On the bright side, you've got that little boutique to keep you from getting bored. That little boutique. The business I'd worked on for more than a decade, which had steadily grown into a profitable enterprise, far more lucrative than Stephen's middle management position. Not that he'd ever bothered to appreciate how successful it actually was. He thought of it as a glorified hobby, something I did for fun while he brought home the real money. He was in for a rude awakening once he realized just how little he actually understood about my finances. But that was for later. I could practically see him snickering over that text message, pleased with how much it would sting. I chuckled to myself at the thought of the certified letters he'd soon receive. Turning on the alarm system for my boutique, I headed to the home I'd inherited from my grandmother, and guess whose name was, thankfully, never added to the deed? That's right. Stephen had hinted multiple times about putting both our names on it, but something always stopped me from following his lead. Over the next hour, I assembled the folder of documents Danielle would need. Pay stubs, receipts, account statements, anything. That might prove relevant to our upcoming legal confrontation. Slipping the papers into a folder, I noticed our old wedding album beneath it. We had been so different back then, so young and full of optimism. Stephen was confident, but not yet arrogant, and I was trusting enough to ignore the occasional red flags that cropped up. Now, the man who used to make me laugh was sending me heartless text messages, like I was disposable. I set the album aside. My phone chimed with more texts from Stephen. I've been planning this escape for a while. Jenna actually listens to me, something you never did. Hope you can handle life on your own. I took screenshots of every line. The more evidence of his malicious intent, the better it would look in court. Let him dig his own grave. Another text arrived, practically oozing smugness. By the way, I used the shared credit card for our flights and the hotel. Think of it as my farewell present. That one made me smile. First, because it was precisely the kind of incriminating statement I could hand right over to Danielle, and second, because I couldn't wait to cancel that reservation. Without a second thought, I dialed the credit card company. "Hello, Ms. Bennett here," I said briskly. "I need to report fraudulent charges on my account." "Certainly, Ms. Bennett," replied the agent. "Which charges are you referring to?" "2 first-class tickets to Miami and a hotel booking at a place called the Shoreline Grand," I said, reading the details from my phone. "And I want my husband removed from the account immediately." "Do you have documentation that these charges are fraudulent?" the agent asked with polite concern. "I have text messages from him clearly bragging he used our shared credit for a personal trip he concocted behind my back," I explained. "He also stole money from our joint account. I can forward the messages if needed." Her tone remained professional, but I could sense a flicker of satisfaction in her voice. "That will be quite helpful, Ms. Bennett. The charges will be reversed and the card will be canceled. We'll also remove him from access. I'm sorry. You had to deal with this." I thanked her, imagining Stephen trying to check in at the airport only to find his tickets invalid. If he thought he was going to whisk Jenna off for a lavish Miami getaway on my dime, he was sorely mistaken. Another notification flashed across my screen as I wrapped up the call. "Don't worry about the house. I'll let you stay there for a while until you find something cheaper." I almost choked on a laugh. He really believed he had any legal claim to the property I'd owned free and clear since my grandmother passed. Did he forget all those times I told him it was non-negotiable, that the deed stay solely in my name? Or was his ego simply that large? He followed with, "And we can negotiate a fair buyout for your share of the boutique. I don't want to see you struggle." My share of my boutique, which I had founded, funded, and expanded through my own meticulous efforts and a small inheritance from my grandmother. Stephen had mocked my devotion to it for years, dismissing it as a little shop. Yet now he suddenly believed it was as much his as it was mine. I savored a glass of the good wine that night, a vintage I'd been saving for a meaningful occasion. If this wasn't reason enough to crack it open, nothing was. Tomorrow I'd finally see the look on his face, if only through secondhand reports, when he realized the money he thought he'd stolen wasn't there, the credit card reservations he'd made were canceled, and the house he intended to claim was beyond his grasp. Saturday morning arrived with a barrage of frantic texts from Stephen. "Ava, what the hell did you do to the credit card? The airline says our tickets are void. The hotel is telling me the reservation was canceled. What's going on? Answer me!" I switched my phone to silent and focused on preparing my boutique for its weekend rush. Saturdays tended to be my busiest days, especially with new designer handbags arriving that week. My staff looked to me for guidance, so I greeted them with the same calm, confident smile I always wore. Inside, though, I felt a thrill of satisfaction. Around noon, the phone in my office rang. I checked the caller ID. Irene, Stephen's mother. Normally, we had a decent relationship, but I braced myself, fully expecting some kind of confrontation. "Ava," Irene began, "Stephen is devastated. He says you've been manipulative, that you forced him to do this. Now you're blocking his vacation plans. Is that really necessary?" I took a slow breath. "Did he mention," I asked evenly, "that he cleared our joint account and used our credit card for a trip with his girlfriend without telling me?" A moment of static crackled through the line. Then Irene spoke quietly. "I know he said something about the account. He told us it was all a misunderstanding, that you pushed him away." I let out a humorless chuckle. "He sent me texts literally bragging about it, Irene. Do you want me to read them to you?" I offered. He also insulted my age and basically told me to enjoy my little shop. Her silence told me all I needed to know. Finally, she sighed. I told him that was harsh, but he insists you left him no choice. I almost felt a twinge of pity for her. I appreciate you calling, I said. But my lawyer wants minimal contact with Stephen and his family now that we're proceeding with everything. So I'm going to end this call, Irene. I hope you understand. Before she could protest, I gently hung up. Over the next few hours, I heard from mutual friends that Stephen's sister, Hannah, was already dishing out the story to anyone who would listen. Evidently, Stephen and Jenna had been forced to check into a cheap motel near the airport since their fancy reservation was void. Worse or better, from my perspective, Stephen's personal credit cards had been maxed out for quite some time, something that came as no surprise to me given how much he'd been spending on gym memberships, designer wardrobes, and romantic dinners that didn't include his wife. My lawyer, Danielle, called to confirm everything. We've got an emergency hearing set for Monday, she told me. Given Stephen's texting trail and the evidence of him clearing the joint account, we're in a favorable position to freeze whatever remains. He's not even denying it, I said, rummaging through some new inventory as we spoke. He's practically bragging. Danielle sighed. Then he has only himself to blame. We'll serve him at the motel. Judging by the girlfriend's social media, they're both pretty forthcoming about their exciting new life together. I smirked, imagining the reaction on Jenna's face when they realized none of their new lifestyle bills were getting paid as they'd planned. Perfect, I murmured. Sure enough, Stephen texted me again later that evening, this time dripping with false bravado. You think you can beat me? I have copies of all your boutique's financial papers. Half that business is rightfully mine. Oh, if only he knew how thoroughly I had documented the boutique's history, my grandmother's seed money, the official incorporation in my name alone, the day I opened the shop long before we were married. He might have discovered the superficial statements, but he'd never see the private ledgers I kept so carefully. I forwarded his text to Danielle, another line for the file. Stephen walked into court in an outfit that tried too hard to make him look younger. Skinny jeans, an overly tight shirt, and a blazer that was a size too small. Jenna lingered outside the courtroom, looking uncomfortable. When I spotted her, I could see in her eyes that maybe she was starting to grasp that running off to Miami with a middle-aged man wasn't the glamorous dream she'd imagined. Meanwhile, Danielle handed the judge all our evidence in a neat chronological order. There were the texts where Stephen admitted emptying the joint account, the credit card statements for flights and hotel rooms, even side-by-side comparisons of the real deposit amounts from his workplace versus the inflated late-night hours he claimed to me. Stephen's attorney tried to twist the situation, claiming, Your Honor, my client regrets making impulsive choices. However, Mrs. Bennett intentionally provoked him, driving him into the arms of another woman. Danielle didn't even blink. Are we referring to the text where Mr. Bennett bragged about leaving for Miami and taking the funds? She asked. Or shall we discuss the credit card charges he openly acknowledges? The judge looked over the documents. Mr. Bennett, she addressed Stephen directly, you appear to have admitted on record to draining your shared funds and attempting to use joint resources for a personal trip with another individual. Is that correct? Stephen shifted his weight and mumbled something like, I just needed a clean break. A clean break is one thing, the judge replied, tapping the papers. But leaving your spouse by text, seizing shared money, and spending it on a romantic getaway is quite another. Stephen's lawyer cleared his throat. We'd also like to argue that Mr. Bennett has a right to half of the boutique's revenue. It expanded during their marriage, so it's a marital asset. Danielle calmly flipped to the relevant section of our evidence. The boutique was established in Mrs. Bennett's name prior to the marriage, funded by her inheritance, and never co-mingled with the couple's personal finances. We have a paper trail proving it. I watched Stephen's face tighten as reality set in. For years, he teased me for my obsessive spreadsheets and meticulous record-keeping. Now, all that data was about to dismantle every one of his claims. He hadn't realized that I was always 10 steps ahead, quietly and calmly covering my bases. The judge closed the folder with a firm snap. Based on this evidence, I'm issuing a freeze on all shared assets pending a final distribution. Mr. Bennett is to return the funds he removed from the joint account within 24 hours. His mouth opened. But I've already spent a lot of that, the judge cut him off. Then you'll have to figure out how to make restitution. Also, considering these credit card statements and messages, your actions may have additional legal consequences. I suggest you think carefully about your next moves. Outside the courtroom, I glimpsed Jenna tugging at Stephen's sleeve, probably pressing him to explain how their glamorous plans had collapsed. His response was lost in the echo of my footsteps as I exited the courthouse, head held high. I had a boutique to run, a profitable, thriving business that was mine alone. What followed was a dizzying few weeks as Stephen tried every trick in the book. He claimed I'd stolen his intellectual property for the boutique. He insisted he'd contributed emotional labor that entitled him to a cut of my profits. He even said he'd had the original idea for the shop, hoping to sow some confusion. Danielle met every wild accusation with a calm wave of her hand and a matching piece of documentation that debunked him. For a time, Jenna's social media updates revealed their big move had morphed into renting a cheap one-bedroom near the office. She posted complaints about living on takeout and discount groceries, apparently not realizing Steven's credit had been maxed out well before his extravagant Miami fantasies. Ironically, the more she complained publicly, the stronger my case became. Danielle compiled everything, including pictures of them stuck in that dingy apartment. We found receipts of his continued spending on random nonsense, possibly in a misguided attempt to sustain an image of success. Steven's family, who had initially called me outraged on his behalf, began to change their tune. His mother, Irene, left a message on my voicemail sounding both apologetic and exhausted. His sister, Hannah, told our mutual acquaintances she couldn't believe the transformation in him. For me, however, none of this was new. I'd seen the decline, from the man I once loved to the one who'd grown resentful and reckless when life didn't go the way he'd hoped. Meanwhile, the boutique thrived. Word of my personal drama had leaked into the community, prompting a wave of support from loyal customers, and even new ones who admired how I stood up for myself. Several local business owners reached out, offering help or partnerships, praising my foresight in protecting my assets. One afternoon, while finalizing the next season's inventory, I got yet another text from Steven. "You've turned everyone against me. You'll regret it. Nobody will want to buy from you once they hear how vindictive you are." I forwarded the text to Danielle, along with all the others, adding it to our ever-growing folder. My only response to him was silence. The less I engaged, the clearer his desperation appeared. Through the grapevine, I learned that Jenna's patience was wearing thin. She'd apparently believed Steven had this enormous nest egg, or at least enough credit to keep them floating in comfort while they transitioned into new jobs in Florida. Finding herself in a cramped apartment instead, no fancy flights, no nice dinners, hadn't been part of her plan. She aired her complaints everywhere, from her Instagram stories to half-vented remarks at the office. She even implied that she regretted leaving her old roommate situation. As for me, I slept better than I had in years. Gone was the anxiety over suspicious receipts or the dread of confronting Steven's latest unexplained expense. My routine was peaceful. Open the boutique, greet customers, train my employees, and occasionally chat with Danielle about the upcoming final hearing. Sometimes the best revenge really is allowing someone enough rope to hang themselves. All I had done was plan carefully, document meticulously, and wait. The evening before our emergency hearing, I sipped another glass of that special wine. Danielle had prepped me thoroughly. I have more than enough evidence to show he acted in bad faith. The judge likely won't award him a cent of the boutique. He's basically torpedoed his own case with these texts. We both knew there was no guarantee, but the odds were firmly on our side. I was ready, and I suspected Steven was nowhere near as composed. I left that emergency hearing with my head held high, my heels clicking decisively on the courthouse floor. Steven, my husband of 12 years who had just tried to run off with our joint funds, and a much younger girlfriend, looked rattled for the first time in weeks. Meanwhile, Jenna hovered by the exit, staring at her phone and refusing to meet my eyes. I'll never forget the look on Steven's face when the judge told him to pay back the money he'd taken. Every ounce of smugness drained away, replaced by a realization that he'd made one colossal mistake. He was still muttering and shaking his head in disbelief as I walked out into the crisp afternoon air. After months of seeing him strut around like he was invincible, it was a welcome sight. In the days following that hearing, my lawyer, Danielle, and I worked steadily toward finalizing the divorce settlement. We knew Steven would throw up roadblocks wherever he could. He'd hired a cheap but aggressive attorney who specialized in painting the other spouse as manipulative. But you can't argue with screenshots of text messages, canceled credit cards, and proof of one partner funneling money into secret dinners and hotel rooms. I was nothing if not prepared. I had every last receipt from the boutique I'd owned and operated for years, my inheritance from Grandma, my original business plan, my carefully documented ledgers. Whenever Steven tried to claim he'd given me moral support or helped with marketing, Danielle calmly pointed out that 1. The shop had been established in my name before our marriage, and 2. We had never mixed personal and business finances. While the legal wheels turned, my everyday life became unexpectedly peaceful. For the first time in ages, I didn't have to tiptoe around a sulking spouse who came home late with flimsy excuses. I left the house each morning feeling clear-headed, slipping the key into the door of my boutique with a renewed sense of purpose. My employees, some of whom had sensed my personal troubles, saw I was more focused and driven than ever. That renewed drive produced tangible results. A new wave of clients came through the doors. Word had spread around town that I was facing down a messy divorce from a husband who'd tried to leave me high and dry, but that I'd protected myself with forethought and careful planning. Other women, strangers, old acquaintances, even a few who'd once admired Stephen's charm, suddenly viewed me as something of an example, living proof that they didn't need to crumble under pressure from a deceitful partner. One woman confided in me as she purchased a designer handbag. "I found out my husband's been hiding credit card statements. You've inspired me to do my own homework. See what's really going on." She gave me a shaky smile. "Thank you for showing me it's okay to stand up for myself." I nodded, touched by her words. If my own predicament could help others realize their worth, maybe it was worth all the heartache. 6 months passed in a blur of legal filings, hearings, and near-weekly conversations with Danielle. The divorce wasn't fully final yet, but we were close. Meanwhile, my boutique flourished, enough that I quietly began scouting locations for a second shop across town. It felt risky, but the numbers supported it. My original store was operating at capacity, and our online sales were expanding every month. One evening, after a full day of meeting with realtors, I headed home to see multiple missed calls from Irene, Stephen's mother. Irene had wavered between defending her son and expressing concern for me since the day we got married. Naturally, she'd chosen to believe Stephen's story early on, the one in which I was cold and controlling. But by now, even she couldn't deny how poorly he was handling everything. I returned her call, bracing for whatever spiel she might give me. "Ava," Irene said, sounding weary, "Stephen won't talk to us about his finances, and he's behind. On his own bills. I don't know what else to do." I took a moment to think of a polite response. "He needs to accept responsibility, Irene. He had so many opportunities to come to a fair agreement. Instead, he's been digging himself deeper." She let out a tired sigh. "I never thought he'd hurt you like this. And now he's hurting himself too." "I'm sorry, Ava." I thanked her for apologizing but didn't say much else. I'd built walls around my emotions regarding Stephen, and that was for the best. Not even Irene's regret could change the outcome he'd brought upon himself. Throughout that summer, Stephen's life took a series of nosedives. He narrowly escaped losing his job, but only because the company had a policy against abrupt dismissals without a thorough review. Human Resources, however, was less than pleased when they discovered he'd initiated a relationship with Jenna, the fresh-out-of-college receptionist. There was a formal reprimand. No promotions, no raises. He was basically stuck in limbo. Social media gossip spread fast. Hannah, his sister, confided in mutual friends that he spent most weekends at home, glued to his phone, complaining that the world was against him. I also learned Jenna's starry-eyed excitement had quickly worn off when she realized that Stephen's big move to Miami was impossible without funds, and that his credit cards were either canceled or maxed. Instead of sunlit beaches, she got a one-bedroom apartment above a noisy convenience store. It didn't take long for her to post cryptic messages about toxic relationships and broken promises. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. She might have known what she was getting into, or she might have been duped by Stephen's false bravado. Either way, it wasn't my job to rescue her. Sometime around late June, Lauren, a friend of my assistant manager, mentioned that Jenna had moved out, leaving Stephen with a pile of unpaid rent and utility bills he couldn't cover. He'd even tried contacting a pyramid scheme he found online, convinced he could earn thousands quickly to salvage his sinking lifestyle. "He's in denial," Lauren told me when she came in to buy a necklace, lowering her voice so other customers wouldn't overhear. "Still blaming you and calling you vindictive, yeah, while he's the one who basically started all this." I shrugged, forcing a polite smile. "He can say what he wants," I said. "At this point, my lawyer has everything we need." It was the truth. I was beyond worrying about Stephen's opinion or his attempts to damage my reputation. The reality was, I was close to finalizing the second boutique, a bigger, more stylish location that would handle an even broader range of merchandise. My life was moving forward while his seemed to be stuck in quicksand. After many months, the day of our final divorce hearing arrived. The courthouse was busy, teeming with attorneys and couples locked in their own messy battles. Danielle met me just inside the entrance, her briefcase bulging with meticulously organized files. Stephen showed up looking worn down, wearing slacks that appeared a size too large. Gone was the cocky grin and the tailored blazer that once symbolized his desperate bid to appear younger. He and his new lawyer tried a Hail Mary approach, claiming the rapid growth of my boutique was due to his support, and that, therefore, he deserved a share in its profits. Danielle calmly presented the judge with our stack of evidence, including deposit histories, brand registration documents, and an itemized timeline showing exactly when the boutique was founded and how its earnings never intersected with Steven's personal finances. She pulled out screenshots of Steven's messages mocking my little store and labeling it a hobby. He couldn't claim to have nurtured something he'd spent years belittling. I watched him squirm, noticing that he was sweating under the fluorescent lights. His new lawyer tried to speak over Danielle a couple of times, but the judge cut that off quickly. "I'll not have shouting in my courtroom," she warned. Her final ruling was swift and pointed. My house, which I'd inherited from my grandmother, remained mine alone. The boutique and all related assets were indisputably separate property, given both the timing of its inception and the meticulous financial records. Stephen was left with his personal belongings and a fraction of our remaining joint savings, whatever was left after paying back what he owed. The judge also gave him a firm reprimand for abusing joint resources for his affair. When we left, Stephen caught up to me in the hallway, face twisted in bitterness. "You got everything," he spat. "I'm 30 years older than that girlfriend now. No real assets, living in a cheap apartment. You tore my life apart." I turned to him. "You tore it apart all by yourself, Stephen. I just refused to go down with you." With that, I stepped past him, the weight of a decade-long relationship slipping away like a coat I no longer needed. 6 months after the divorce, finalized, a sense of freedom enveloped me once the paperwork was officially complete. People often describe divorce as painful and complicated, and it was, but for me it also felt like a rebirth. I poured my energy into launching my second boutique, unveiling it with a grand opening that attracted local press. They wanted to interview me about resilience, about starting over at nearly 40, with a business that was now bigger than ever. "Did your divorce fuel your ambition?" one reporter asked gently, trying to be delicate. I smiled. "I'd say it removed certain obstacles. If anything, it showed me the importance of believing in yourself and staying prepared." The second store took off, surpassing even my optimistic forecasts. We featured upscale clothing lines, accessories, and a curated collection of emerging designers. My original boutique kept thriving too, and together, they started shaping a kind of local empire. Every once in a while, I'd catch myself thinking of how Stephen used to insult my little shop, and I'd feel a wave of pride at how far I'd come. During one particularly busy Saturday at the new location, a familiar face walked in, Hannah, Stephen's sister. She browsed the jewelry counter before nervously approaching me. "Hey, Ava," she started. "I know things were tense when everything happened, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. None of us realized how badly Stephen was spinning." "The story." I offered her a polite nod. "It's in the past," I told her. "He made his decisions. I made mine." She sighed. "He's in a bad place. Maxed out his credit cards again and tried an online gambling stint, which obviously didn't work out. Mom's exhausted. Dad's furious. They might have to let him move back home if he can't afford rent anymore." I pressed my lips together, uncertain how to respond. "That's up to them," I said softly, trying to keep any judgment out of my tone. "I hope he finds his way." She nodded, her shoulders sagging. Me too. Even as she left, I felt oddly detached. I wasn't heartless. I could sympathize with their frustration. But the days when Stephen's well-being felt like my responsibility were over. Now I had employees to pay, customers to serve, and an expanding business that needed my focus. 1 year after the divorce, the growth of my boutiques was so consistent that I started planning a third store, one in a trendy downtown district with foot traffic from tourists and professionals alike. People began approaching me for advice on entrepreneurship. A local business group even invited me to speak at a seminar about protecting your brand and your assets. At that seminar, a woman raised her hand during the Q&A and said, "My husband calls me paranoid because I don't want him on the deed for the store I'm opening. He says marriage means sharing everything. What do you think?" My throat tightened briefly. I recognized the vulnerability in her eyes. She wanted reassurance that she wasn't being disloyal by wanting to protect herself. I took a moment before responding. Sharing is a wonderful concept when both people respect each other's boundaries and contributions, but you have to protect your finances if something feels off. Separate property documentation can save you a lot of heartache. "Trust your gut," she exhaled, relief evident in her smile. Later, she thanked me personally. "I've watched so many women lose everything when relationships soured. You gave me the courage to stand my ground." Driving home that evening, I couldn't help reflecting on how different my life had become. Only a year ago, I'd been stuck in a toxic marriage. Now, I was negotiating a lease on my third location, traveling to business expos, and speaking at conferences about resilience. I wasn't a scorned wife anymore. I was recognized as a savvy, independent business owner. Rumors reached me from time to time. Stephen was spiraling deeper into debt, complaining that I'd ruined him by removing his access to my resources. He'd told his mother it was unfair that I'd grown successful while he floundered. Irene called me once or twice to express regret and confusion about how Stephen could have let things get so bad. I listened politely, gave no promises, and continued living my life. Jenna, that receptionist-turned-girlfriend, apparently posted a series of rants about Stephen's negativity and refusal to take responsibility. After moving out of his apartment, she told friends she realized he was all talk. He expected her to fund their lifestyle once his money dried up. Nothing about those developments surprised me. It confirmed what I'd realized a long time ago. Stephen was always seeking someone else to blame for his mistakes. 18 months after the divorce, when I opened the third boutique, local media coverage again asked for a feature. This time, the spin was all about championing local female entrepreneurs. I wore a simple but elegant dress from one of my favorite designers and cut the ribbon in front of a small crowd. We sold out nearly half our inventory that weekend alone. During the event, a young woman stepped inside, glancing around like she was nervous about being seen. She wore minimal makeup and had a tote bag slung over her shoulder. When I approached to greet her, I realized it was Jenna, the woman who'd once run off with Stephen. She looked embarrassed, as if she half expected me to throw her out. "Ava," she began softly, "I know I have no right to be here, but I wanted to say I'm sorry." I took a moment to absorb her words. She'd obviously rehearsed them. "You don't owe me anything, Jenna," I said finally, keeping my voice even. "We both got caught in Stephen's web of lies. Maybe you. More than me, since you believed him." She lowered her gaze. "He told me all sorts of things about you," she said. "That you belittled him, never supported him, that the boutique was a silly vanity project. I was dumb enough to think he was this misunderstood man. I just wanted to tell you that I admire what you've built. It's amazing." A wave of conflicting emotions passed over me. Resentment, pity, relief. "Thanks," I replied. "I'm glad you found your way out too." Jenna hesitated, then nodded. "Me too. I've started my own business, doing social media consulting, mostly for small brands. It's not huge, but it's honest work and it's mine. I hope you believe me when I say I wish you well." With that, she left, shoulders squared, looking more self-assured than the starry-eyed girl I'd once met. I couldn't say we'd ever be friends, but I respected that she'd learned from the experience. Sometimes people do change after hitting rock bottom. 2 years after the divorce. By the time the 2-year mark rolled around, I had 4 boutiques operating in different corners of the city, each one thriving in its own niche. I'd grown my staff to almost 25 people, including managers, sales associates, and online support for the brand's digital storefront. Several times I was approached about doing a feature in a national magazine about women-led success stories. Life was busy and fulfilling. I occasionally dated, but the emotional scars from Stephen's betrayal made me cautious. I told myself I was okay with that. My focus was on my business and building a life on my own terms. And so far, that life was flourishing. One afternoon, Hannah came by my flagship store, my original boutique. She was rummaging through the new accessories line when she confessed that Stephen had, in fact, moved back into their parents' house. He just refused to scale down or find a roommate, so he's back in his childhood bedroom at 46. She said, shaking her head. "He's still complaining about how you set him up." A part of me wanted to laugh, but pity overshadowed the humor. "He set himself up, Hannah," I said gently. "No one forced him to do any of it." She nodded. "I know. That's what Mom and Dad have been telling him. They're done enabling. They only let him move in so he wouldn't be homeless." I watched her leave with a heavy heart. It's tough seeing someone with so much potential self-destruct, but at the end of the day, his choices were his own. 3 years after the divorce, local business circles recognized my shops as a major success story, and I received an invitation to a high-profile Women's Entrepreneurship Award ceremony. On the night of the event, I found myself sitting at a round table among other nominees, women who had launched tech startups, food empires, and charitable foundations. When the time came for the award, I held my breath. Winning wasn't guaranteed. The competition was fierce. But hearing them call my name as the recipient of the Entrepreneur of the Year award was something I'd only dreamed of in the darkest days of the divorce. I rose to a standing ovation, my heart pounding. Taking the stage, I delivered a concise speech, thanking my dedicated team, my loyal customers, and, strangely enough, my own instincts. "Above all," I said, voice echoing in the auditorium, "I thank the part of me that refused to hand over my dreams. We can protect what we build if we dare to prepare." I saw tears in a few eyes across the audience. When I stepped away from the mic, I felt overwhelming gratitude. Stephen used to tease me for being overly cautious or paranoid with my finances. Now, that caution had helped me earn a prestigious business award. Life has a funny way of rewarding preparedness. At the 5-year anniversary of my original boutique, I decided to host a lavish celebration. We'd come a long way from that single brick-and-mortar store. Now I oversaw 5 locations plus a bustling e-commerce site. My staff had grown to almost 40, many of whom I considered family. We decorated the store with fresh flowers and twinkling lights, inviting customers and friends for a day of shopping, champagne toasts, and reflection on how far we'd come. Early in the evening, as the celebration hit a lull, Irene slipped in through the doors. She wore a tasteful jacket and skirt that she must have bought from one of my stores because I recognized the brand. She looked older, more lines around her eyes, more weight on her shoulders, but her posture was upright, dignified as she approached. "Me, Ava," she said, voice trembling. "I just wanted to say you've done something extraordinary. I remember how Stephen used to talk about your boutique like it was nothing. Now look at you. This is a citywide brand." I offered a polite half smile. "It's been quite a journey." She lowered her gaze. "He's still at our house, complains daily about how he lost everything in the divorce, but we all know he threw it away piece by piece." For a moment, my mind flashed to the text message he'd sent 5 years ago, the one that set all of this in motion. He'd basically said I was old and washed up, that my little shop was all I had left. Had he truly believed I'd be helpless? Irene seemed to guess my thoughts. "He can't see that he ruined his own life. He still thinks it's your fault, or Jenna's fault, or the company's fault. It's sad." I kept my expression neutral. "I'm sorry to hear that." After a subdued silence, Irene said goodbye and left. I turned, drifting to the back office, which I decorated with mementos of my journey. There, framed on the wall, was the text message I'd printed out and placed beneath my Entrepreneur of the Year plaque. The text read, "You can keep the house for now, but let's be real. You're just getting older, and all you have is that little shop to keep you busy." Below it was a simple sign. "Sometimes the best revenge is simply to succeed. Looking." At that framed reminder, I felt a wave of triumph, and also peace. That cruel message had once stung like a slap in the face, but in the end, it propelled me forward. I left the office to rejoin the celebration in the main showroom, the music picking up as a fresh crowd arrived to toast our anniversary. Near closing time, I spotted a teenage girl standing by the display of our newest designer handbags. She looked around shyly, as though in awe of the store's bright displays and successful aura. I approached, ready to see if she needed help. She smiled hesitantly. "Hi," she said. "I'm doing a school project on local female business owners, and I was hoping to interview you sometime." She held up a small voice recorder. "I heard your story is pretty inspiring." I smiled back, feeling a sense of pride. "I'd be happy to talk to you," I said warmly. "Stop by during a slow day and we can chat over coffee." She beamed, nodded, and scurried off, excited about the possibility of sharing my story with her classmates. Seeing her youthful enthusiasm reminded me of how far I'd come, and how important it was to encourage the next generation not to give up or hand over their power. As I finally closed the doors that night, switching off the boutique's lights, I paused to absorb the moment. 5 years ago, Stephen had walked out of my life by text message, convinced I'd beg him to come back. He believed he'd taken the money that mattered, the last shards of our joint assets. But he never understood that my greatest wealth was my self-reliance, my ability to stand strong, keep impeccable records, and believe in myself enough to build something bigger than he could ever imagine. The world keeps turning, dreams keep growing, and for me, the future still looks bright. I have 5 thriving boutiques, a supportive community, and a business I built from the ground up. Stephen's shadow no longer looms over my success. He remains stuck, but I've moved far beyond the illusions he tried to trap me in. By now, he's just a footnote in the story of my greatest comeback, an unintentional catalyst for the empire I'm still building today. With that last thought, I locked the door, the soft click echoing through the now quiet store. Tomorrow, a new day would bring more customers, more opportunities, and more reminders of the woman I'd become. And if Stephen ever dared to question my worth again, I had a mountain of success and a framed text message to prove otherwise.